Welcome to the Hollywood Makers Podcast. My name is Glori. I'm your host for today's episode. And today I'm going to be talking with Christina Sibul, who is an award-winning producer, filmmaker, professor, and an executive director for the CSU Entertainment Alliance. We're going to be talking about her experience in the industry, as well as overcoming obstacles and why diversity matters so much in our industry. So let's get started. Thank you so much, Christina, for joining us here today. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and your illustrious career so far?
Sure. And I hope my career is illustrious, but who knows, right? You know, history will tell. My name is Christina Sibul, and I am currently a professor at CSUN, and I run two things for them, the Entertainment Industry Institute, which unites the entertainment industry to CSUN, and then, CSUN back to it. And then I also do the bigger thing for the exact same thing for the CSU Entertainment Alliance, which is the 22 campuses of the CSU to the entertainment industry and back. But how I came to there was I've been a development and production executive, consultant, and an independent producer for the last 20 years. And some of my iconic films. And gosh, what a gift it is to be able to say iconic, right?
Love it.
That's something I'm super happy about, was the movie 13, which is about 13-year-old girls growing up in Los Angeles, which was Catherine Hardwicke's first movie. Sideways, which is what everyone knows, and yet that was probably the least soul-giving to me in some ways. Not that it's not a great movie, but it's a little outside the realm of what I do now and all of that. And I've consulted and or had a hand in probably over 50 films and various television shows that are on the air or have been on the air.
Love that. That's like such an amazing thing. Over 50 is just like, the dream.
My God. It's funny if you try to count them. I'm like, oh, yeah, I consulted on that one. Did drafted
Right?
notes, things like that.
Exactly, right? You just kind of have your hands all over the place.
I know, right? Yeah.
I know you also got your career started in Indiewood and the kind of boom of all the indie filmmaking scene. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what first drew you to that, and also how did you break into that industry?
Yeah. Gosh. So Indiewood was a really beautiful time of Hollywood and the festival era. And specifically, my quote unquote Indiewood start was 2003 Sundance, where I had two films. And I'll talk about them both. One was Catherine Hardwicke's 13, which was a movie I cried for, I bled for, did all the things. And I don't think anyone expected it to be as culturally relevant as it still is. And I'm very emotional today, and all of a sudden just talking about that movie, and I just wanted to cry all of a sudden because that movie was so important to me, sort of in the ideation of it and the whys and the hows. It was Catherine's first movie. She was in her mid-40s when she first directed that. It had been co-written by Nikki Reed, who was a 13-year-old girl at the time. Now she's a beautiful, well-accomplished businesswoman and, in her own right. And Catherine's had a really illustrious career since then. But Catherine had been knocking on the doors for a really long time. She had written a number of screenplays, but she'd also been a profoundly influential production designer, but never had the chance to emerge into being a director. And so being part of that part of her journey is incredibly emotionally important to me. And how hard we had to fight to get that movie done. I always joke around, it's my arts and crafts movie, that like it was handmade on every level. And so in 2003, I had two movies at Sundance. One was 13, and the other one was Tom McCarthy's Station Agent. And Tom was a really good friend from graduate school and the New York theater scene. And I won't say the big theater scene, but the little tiny theater scene where we were doing plays in lofts of the friends of our parents. And sometimes they knew we were there. Other times they did not. They were on vacation. They were elsewhere. And yet we had Peter Dinklage in a little tiny play that we were doing that maybe had 30 people attending and things like that. And so Tom was a dear friend. And Station Agent was something that we had done a lot of plays together, cabarets together at Yale. And then I worked with him as a dramaturg, somebody that really developed work and sort of developed the voice of the author quite a bit when we were in graduate school, and we went to Yale Drama together. and we went to New York, did all these like down and dirty little plays and things like that. He decided to write a screenplay. We worked for a really long time on it. And I showed it around Hollywood, and the response I got from everyone was, "This is not a screenplay. This is not a screenplay. This is not a screenplay. I don't know what this is, but this is not a screenplay." Eventually got financed out of New York. And then lo and behold, Tom won the BAFTA that year for best screenplay. So it's just like, take that, you know.
Wow.
Anyway, so
It
that
was a
was my entry
screenplay.
in. And so that was a pretty successful like Sundance debut,
Yeah,
right?
I would say so.
Right? And we had these two little movies that like, you know, we trucked around the festival together because we're like, we're the two underdogs and like, hey, let's hold hands and walk through this festival together. I'll say Sundance was a really different beast then. I still love Sundance. I want to go this year, all of that. You know, but we were really lucky to go, get to be there, be part of bidding wars, get to choose our buyers, all of that kind of thing. How I got there was I went to grad school, became a casting associate in New York, and then also a literary manager. I worked with plays. I worked with plays, playwrights, actors, great actors, all of that kind of thing. And then when I moved out to LA, I didn't have any intention of getting in the film business. I moved out with a guy I was in a relationship with and kind of stumbled into a job, you know, in development. I didn't really know what that was, but all of my skills in terms of developing plays, producing work, um, and working with writers and directors is exactly what development is,
Yeah.
you know? And so I worked with a producer who had just gone independent from a studio. And the first writers list I was ever given for any sort of first project I was ever given was Sideways. He asked me to read the novel. And I read the novel. He said, "You only need to read 20 pages." And I read 20 pages and I was like, and he said, "Can you give me a casting list?" And the two guys I put on the cast, I put 20 actors probably on each character. That there's two main roles in that movie. And both Thomas Hayden Church and Paul Giamatti were on that original casting list, even though the movie got made 8 years later. Right. And Paul was my diehard one because when I read the book, when I first read the book, it was Paul's voice reading it to me in my head because it was just he had been a friend from graduate school, and just that curmudgeonly tone of that character, knowing who Paul was, hyper intelligent but also completely clueless in some ways about the ways of the world and how to relate to humans.
Yeah.
You know, wanting
Mhm.
connection so badly but not knowing how to make it. You know,
Mhm.
just it felt like Paul. You know,
Yeah.
and so that just sort of dovetailed in, and I had both a great and challenging working relationship with this producer, but we were really successful together, and we got some really good movies made, and I have immense respect for him just in terms of his place in the industry and how he, you know, essentially let me do my own thing and let me really be a major part of the projects we were putting forward.
Yeah, we love that. I think it's always great to hear. I think that's something why they mention, like, in this industry, right, networking is so important because it really is about who you know and who can kind of bring those opportunities back to you that you don't really
Yeah.
know where they'll come from or you don't know what they'll blossom into, but it's so important to just make sure you're open to them, right? And that you're always like, looking for wherever you can find them.
And you have no idea where, I mean, you have no idea where those opportunities are going to come from, right?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
in my when I was working in casting in New York, I would take Monday afternoons off to go play softball in Central Park with all the Broadway show leagues and like, you know, and the various HBO shows and things like
Yeah.
that. And I
Mhm.
played for, oh my gosh, what was it? It was a blue light theater company, and I played for their team. And I remember I played second base a lot, and J.K. Simmons was my shortstop. And you know, and so I got to know J.K. Simmons from the softball
Mhm.
field. You know, and so
Yeah.
that was like a stupid connection. But I'm the
No s
queen of stupid connections. And I'll be like, oh yeah, I know that person. I played softball with them. Oh yeah, we ran a bake sale together in like 2003. You know,
Yeah, it seems like that's the beauty of the industry though, right? It's like it can come from anywhere, right? And
yeah,
the connections that you make, maybe you'll work together, maybe you just are friends, but there's always that kind of opportunity, which I
And
think
we're
is
all humans. We all either have
yeah,
we all have, like, dogs that we take to the dog park, have kids that we are, like, whatever, in the sandbox with or something like that, or we play softball badly and we need an outlet in Central Park, right? So,
exactly.
like, you never know where you're gonna find the people.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. I think going back to kind of the topic of you breaking into the industry and kind of getting your start, I think one of the things that's important to this podcast is kind of the idea of overcoming
Oh
obstacles.
my god, yeah.
Which, I'm sure you've had many in your career, especially, coming up as like a woman in the industry, which we know is obviously a minority role still to this day. So if there's just any like examples,
Oh my gosh.
any stories of
So,
like obstacles you
yeah, I'll
made,
tell you a little bit. To be honest, I could speak hours on that. Obstacles
I'm just
and
sure you
and
could.
not even overcoming them necessarily, but
Mhm.
just like how you address them because the entirety of your life and the career is obstacles and this industry is all about persistence in so many ways. How do you hold on? And gosh, I was talking about that right the my first job, that first producer I worked with. And the first his job previously, he had been an executive on the Fox lot. So the writers list I had been handed to work from for various things because I didn't know as many writers in New York in LA at the time. I knew New York playwrights and I knew like, a weird assortment of folk and things like that. I didn't know anyone in the film industry. Was he gave me the list basically from Alien 3. They had done at Fox, he'd been the executive on, and it was all white males. And I had come from a very diverse background of reading, literature, humanistic, things like that, and it was like literal it was mind-boggling, where are the women, right? Where are the people of diversity? Where are the women? Where are, the sort of the points of view? And I always believe it's like, this idea that entertainment drives culture, culture drives entertainment. And so if we want to create the culture that we want to see, we have to create the entertainment that reflects the culture we want to see. Oh, and so that's always been really important. And I can talk about some of the roots of why those sort of thoughts came up in so many ways and things like that. But that was I was given this white male list. Like it perhaps speaks to my just inherently subversive nature where I was just like, well, where are the women? Let's just slide some women in. And that was radical.
Yeah.
And then when I really wanted to do this, I think my boss at one point called it your little girl movie when he was talking about 13 or the little girl movie. I think that maybe not mine, maybe I'm personalizing, maybe it was the little girl movie. It 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 was really important to me because that was one of the first times when reading Catherine Hardwicke's 13, Nikki and Catherine's 13, that I felt myself reflected on the page.
Yeah.
And the struggle of being a girl, struggle of being a woman, trying to figure that out and, matching your identity in terms of how you grow up, meeting those challenges. And just seeing how long Catherine had knocked on the door. She went to UCLA for graduate school. And in her class was Alexander Payne, who directed Sideways, David O. Russell, who Catherine production designed a lot of his iconic films early on and things like that, like Three Kings. And she was in the exact same degree program. They all got their movies made. And, I'll say 10 years later, she was still knocking on the door. Right. So that's why 13 was one of the reasons 13 was such a gift to me in so many ways. So that idea of overcoming the blankness of lists. So early in my career, it was always about, hey, let's slide humans of color onto this list. Let's slide women onto this list. Let's make sure that we're considering the fullest scenario of the creators. Because when we're talking about, let's say, God forbid, writing a female character
God forbid. Yeah.
or a character of color, how do we escape fundamental tropes and stereotypes and find a level of authenticity, and it's like, okay, you know what? I have an easy solution. What if we hired a writer of color? What if we hired a
Yeah.
woman?
Mhm.
What if
It's
we,
that simple.
right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Or just considered and had the conversation. So we learned. And that's always the thing about like diversifying a director's list or a writer's list is making sure that we are finding the best human possible for that next stage of the project, you know? And so right now, one of the big challenges is the rhetoric around diversity and things like that. And that's really challenging for me because it's like all it is making sure that you're seeing the full spectrum of who could do this work. And there's systemic ways in which people have been cut out of being able to see how to do this work, you know, or being able to get to those lists and things like that.
Absolutely.
The other thing is, you know, to be honest, I'll just also say being a woman in the industry, I had to transition out of my job that I loved, development and production, when I was pregnant.
Oh, yeah.
Because my boss assumed that once I had the baby, he said these words to me, "I assumed you would not want to come back."
That's a little bit ridiculous. I'm like, just because you have the baby does not mean you give up everything else that you've already
No,
worked hard for.
no.
Yeah, but that is still the assumption, it does seem.
Yeah, exactly. It's still the assumption, the default that the female parent will stay home if there's a female parent in that coupledom, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was really challenging, you know? And uh and then life challenges as well. I will say so that was challenging. I will say it was my female colleagues and cohort that sort of picked me up after that in many ways and were like, "Hey," it was Catherine, to be honest, and was just like, "Hey, will you be with me on Lord's Dogtown, you know, at Sony?" And I was like, "Yeah, I will." Had my baby in hand, took him to the production office, handed him off to a PA, and or just took him with us because I was working a lot with Tony Alva, skateboarder, on that movie and things like that. And Tony had 5 kids. This was my first. So I was like, "Tony, what do I do with this screaming infant?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "I
Mm.
gotcha. I gotcha. Let's put him in the Bjorn. We're gonna go scout some skaters," you know? And I was just,
Mhm.
you
I love
know,
that.
right?
I think it's another really beautiful thing about the industry too, right? Where it's like you really can develop this sense of community, right? And as much as there are maybe certain players that, said things like, "Oh, when you have that baby, maybe you
You don't
I just
want
assumed
work?
you," right?
Hey,
It's like there are
buddy.
people who say that, but then there are also people who uplift you and like will support you throughout whatever phase of just life you're in. And being able to find those people, I think, is super important to all of our careers, right? As we kind of move forward, making sure that you have that community to lean back on because they really do lift you up when you are at your low.
100%. And I'm actually gonna shout out like uh, a beautiful friend in my life. Um, when I got again, I'm in my feels today, so I'm getting emotional sort of talking about it. But
Love it.
you know, I went through a really dark period in my life where I left my marriage and left my financial stability behind and like kind of walked out the door and had nothing, had no job, had no financial sort had no home at that point kind of thing, all that kind of thing, had a child. My child was staying there was a mindfulness of making sure that my son was safe and he was with his father and all of that. But I really needed before I could take my child in terms of fully having custody or sharing custody regarding him, I had to find a way to support myself and a place to live. One of my best friends, or I consider just her so dear in my life, and partially because of this moment when I was going through so much crisis in my life, so much crisis personally and professional was out the window. I just needed help personally, right? And a good friend of mine, Sanaa Lathan, had helped. Um, she suggested me for a major consulting job in my life at Lionsgate. It was with Code Black, um, a company called Code Black, that was a really interesting IP driven studio based company and the humans there were so kind, so accepting, understood how my experience in the independent and studio world prepared me to walk into that role. And it really provided a lifeline. And just having those humans that believed in me and supported me, and then employers that, you know, that had a incredibly sort of flexible point of view of how I could move through my work was fundamental to me getting back on my feet and
Yeah.
persisting in the industry
Yeah.
and allowing me to
That's
use my expertise. I mean, my God, and they
yeah.
respected my expertise. So
Mhm.
amazing.
That's beautiful, yeah. It really does sound too like it's important to find the right fits for you, right? There's tons of production companies, tons of studios, right? But it's finding those places where you can fit in there, right? And the people who you're working with are people who do see you as a person, right? And they value you
Yeah.
for what you bring, but also they respect your experience and knowing that like, this is a person, a full, complete person, not just a person who is going to give me what I need them to give me, but knowing that like this person is someone on a human level that I do respect and that I do, want to make sure is okay. I think that's just a beautiful thing.
100%. And to be honest, there's also, gosh, the people I came up with in the industry, a lot of my friends, people who were assistants at the time, things like that, a lot of them have gone on to produce like the biggest TV shows, the biggest movies, because that's sort of at the point in our careers that we're at right now, or our ages that we're at right now. And finding your footprint for what's meaningful to you is really deeply important, right? And this idea of championing diversity throughout the industry in term was really bone deep. Women, voices of color, humans of color, diversifying lists on the writer side, director side, creator side, valuing the elevation of material. And that's something that's been really profoundly like beautiful that I've seen in terms of the last like 10, 15 years of the industry. 20 years ago, I'll just say like, it felt like Black Hollywood, what studios would do, and this is where I talk myself out of any future studio work in any job whatsoever. But what studios would do like 20 years ago is if there was a script that they kind of liked, they would show it around their premier production companies first. Usually that's code for white for the most
Yeah.
part, right? At
Mhm.
that time. And then they would turn it into Black content because they didn't put that much money behind the development of Black material,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And in a strange way, it became this. I don't reject the moniker of like we'll say urban filmmaking, all of that, but there was a certain point where that got dirty because it became code for there's an audience there. We don't need to develop the work that much because they'll show still it's so underserved that
Yeah.
they'll show up, right?
That's so interesting. They said, "We know that you don't have anything, so when we give you a little, just take it."
Right. Or the scripts that they kind of like, it kind of works, but they don't want to put too much money into developing. That can become part of the Black content. Now, thankfully, I will say we're not there anymore. And what I'm seeing is there's gorgeous, well developed, elevated content that's coming out of diverse creator voices. And I'm so thankful for that and I'm happy for that. Right.
I think
Yeah.
beautiful thing. I think especially like for me, obviously as a Black person in the industry, right? I think it's one of the things that does inspire me, to keep going and is seeing that like despite the history, of Hollywood overall and kind of the things you mentioned with like thinking like, there's not really we don't need to develop Black content. We don't need to develop stories from Black people themselves. But seeing how that has changed, right? And how if it
Yeah.
changed this much, then it can change more. And it's like
Exactly.
knowing that as I go into industry that I want to be a part of that change, right? And being able to have something that's like, there's been work that's been done before me and I'm ready to continue doing that work, right? And being able to know that like the foundational work has been set, but obviously we still got more ways to go.
Well,
And
and
so that's where
that's
it's
exactly, and
exciting.
that's always been so that's critical to me in my career and sort of what I want to do is the elevation of underrepresented voices, right? And so that broadens, it broadened out early for me from women, and partially because I just knew so many fundamentally gifted Black creators, and that sense of the unfairness of what was happening to the voices and the marginalization of the voices. And then throughout, right, the respect for authenticity in the voices of what we create and what we do, and the authenticity of the creator, and all of that kind of thing. Um, and uh, and and again, seeing that sort of resurgence of sort of the embracing of the authentic voice and things like that, and knowing that there's a room, like look at this, we produce so much content now,
Yeah,
right?
always.
And there's
All day, every
room
day.
for all of us,
Mhm.
everyone, and there's room for, and I'm saying, that sounded as though we're parsing out sort of segments, but we're really not. You know what I mean? It's like, um, like, I didn't understand why in my job, one of the things I was known for as a development executive, and what I'm still known when I consult on projects, is I can elevate a project. I can elevate the voice. I can get it to play on awards field. So, you know, if there was a one-liner about what my career is as a consultant, development executive, and producer, is that I can get you onto the awards platforms, or I can get you onto the awards territory. And I didn't understand why early on when I was in my career, why that didn't include voices of color and women,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
why we were still stuck in sort of that repetitive mindset of everything we'd done before,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And I know that's business in Hollywood. It worked once, so it's going to work 493 more times,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, but it's like at some point, someone has to say, "What about something else?" Right? Someone
Yeah,
has to say, "What if things could be different?"
right.
Or someone has to challenge that, right?
And the world has
And
changed. So how do we
mhm,
reflect that?
exactly,
Right?
right? It's like meeting the audience's demands too, right? It's like
Completely.
we know that people are kind of tired of seeing the same old stuff over and over, especially now in the age of, social media, and there's so many other competing, like, aspects for people's attention. It's like, well, you have to make stories that are really gonna resonate with people.
When we look at what the
Um,
drivers are of culture in so many ways, and it's black and brown content and black and brown culture that drives a lot of the greater culture. And then, we
sure.
bash, it's the
Yeah,
the white sort of dominant system sort of like
yeah,
bastardizes it and makes it their own in so many ways. But there is that you know, it's it's just amazing to see sort of the cultural well we all draw from, I'll just say, right?
yeah.
And how we
I agree
ignore
with
certain segments, whereas we have a cultural well.
exactly. It's like, keep drawing from it.
Right.
Keep, like, going deeper.
Yeah,
Let's see
drink
what
deeper
else.
from the water, right?
Yeah,
And don't like be like, okay, I need to like, oh my gosh, there's so many bad metaphors. I'm not gonna actually say it, but you know what I mean. Let's drink deeper from that larger cultural well, right? That's basically
yeah,
it. You know.
exactly, exactly, and I definitely agree with everything that you said so far. I think maybe just, like, one final question for you. I guess as we have talked about everything, overcoming adversity, kind of wanting the industry to change in this, more diverse and richer way. I guess what was like any advice you would have for maybe people who are like you, where they've had maybe some experience or they have some sort of connections and they do want to, empower more of those voices that maybe have not been able to get there so far. What maybe advice would you give to people like
It's
that who
interesting.
want
It's
to
like I think about a lot, you know, oh gosh, I'm gonna start
yeah,
over on that one, but, that's why I teach, right? Is that there's
yeah,
a certain level of empowerment, educating, gosh, lifting. How do you change a system? You change it from the people coming up, and you change
sure.
it from the groundswell of how many people can you reach, right? And
Yeah,
so when I do things like go to as a producer, what if I go to these little small specialized little segments that champion diversity, yes. In terms of like, let's say IFC's Gotham Week, where it's a film market. As a producer, I can hear some great projects, think about whether we want to invest, collaborate, and all of that kind of thing. But that's also a really rarefied space. Those indie filmmakers have found the avenues generally that have come up through Sundance, come up through the labs, come up through that need access that are already demonstrating a level of access, right?
mhm, yeah,
And those aren't the filmmakers that I can like, yeah, I can help them in some material ways, right? But
yeah,
the more profound influence I can have is how do I educate my undergraduates fully? So that they can understand that they have relevance and voice. I'm so happy to be teaching at CSUN, which is an HSI, a Hispanic Serving Institution, and also the CSUs are like the most diverse university system in the United States. So where are we going to find these diverse creators? That's where we're going to find the diverse creators. That's where I'm going to actually be able to coach them into believing their voice, believing their power, sitting in their power, believing that they have a seat at the table, and then helping them coach them on how to get there. And that's not just the writer, directors, and producers. That's the people that make the decisions in the C-suite. And so how do I get my students placed as executives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah.
eventually they can lead a studio or they can lead a division. And that's how the industry is going to change. And then that's how culture is going to change. So I have I always joke around that I have big dreams, right? I have
Mm-hmm.
world domination. It's not for myself,
Absolutely.
right? But it's for my little
Mhm.
flock
Yeah.
of people that I send out into the world and try to change from the inside. And that's regardless of socioeconomic background, neurodiversity, color, all of that kind of thing, right? It's like you have a place and you are as worthy as any human. And when you have, and so how do you carve those spaces? How do you, and my means is is creating that advocacy through education. That to me is meaningful, hardcore advocacy. Because if I get people placed, they'll uplift everyone else. The rising tide lifts all boats, the people around them. And then I get to, because I have the privilege of doing that on the macro scale for the CSUs, that's 22 HSIs. That's crazy. There were 22 HSIs,
Mm-hmm.
but beyond beyond being a Hispanic serving institution, we are incredibly diverse in terms of gender diversity, gender expression, neurodiversity, socioeconomic, all of that kind of thing. And, in addition to our Hispanic identifying students, all sort of realms, and empowering that generation to come up and take over, yay. So if we bring down the system from the inside, that's what I want to do. And I don't mean bring it down. I mean literally just remake it from the inside out.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Rebuild it. Rebuild it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what I want to do. So, it's I don't remember what the original question was, but that's my why in terms of where I am right now. And that's also sort of just my advice too, is that was what the question was what's your advice? My advice is keep learning, keep educating, keep trying, be proactive, right? We all keep knocking, keep networking laterally. Everyone says that, but laterally, don't look up always, and don't ignore the down. Look lateral, look down, look in all directions, right? Because it's your friends. It's the weird person that you just had this life-changing conversation with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Strangely, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're sitting waiting for somebody at a coffee shop and you start getting into this unexpectedly deep conversation with them. And that little
Exactly.
moment of exchange just changed you in a fundamental way, right? So being open, learning, being ever present, keeping yourself growing and changing, not being angry. There's so many things that happen to us that we get angry and we close ourselves off.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of those things that is pretty key. I think, especially in the industry, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. There's,
And
no
resentment. There's a
clear.
lot of resentment. Why
Yeah,
did that person get it and I
exactly.
didn't? Okay. The
Mm-hmm.
universe is going to be big enough for all of us.
Exactly. Where it's there's a lot of rejection, a lot of resentment, a lot of bad feelings that come up. But I think it is important for all of us as we continue the industry, right? You kind of have to hold on to hope, right? There's no way you can keep going and moving forward if you don't have a hopeful idea of the future and that, you can get to where you want to get to, and that maybe it's not going to be done in the way that you want it to get done, but you can get there as long as you just keep going.
Yeah.
Right?
And
I think
become
that's
unattached to what that one singular direction or vision was, if this is how I'm going to succeed, right?
yeah,
Our
exactly.
paths to
Being open to
success
possibility.
are
Mhm.
going to be multilateral, multi-layered, multi-humaned, right? And and our path to success is going to go up, go down, go back and forth, especially now. So, just staying open to what's around you all the time.
Yeah. We love that. And thank you so much. I think that's a beautiful thought to end us with. So once again, Christina, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your perspective. It's been so great.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Of course. All right. We'll talk to
Bye.
you later. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's episode. Remember to like, subscribe, and be a part of the Hollywood Makers community. We have some really great stuff coming up in the future. So stay tuned, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.